I arrived here yesterday very early in the morning because I was using one of these wonderful services that give you cheap flights. What I didn't notice is the cheap flight means I have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to arrive here at 9 o'clock. So I can give you a guided city tour through Manchester and show you all 3 interesting places. In a matter of minutes, no problem, we can organize that. I did that 4 times yesterday. Which gave me time to not prepare my slide deck, as always, but rather to talk with you people as much as I could. And somehow, you know, it felt a little bit yesterday like Granddaddy coming back from the First World War and telling how this all was a long time ago. And actually it feels a little bit that way, yes it does. But I want to introduce you a little bit to, you know, working at Red Hat. As you all know, Red Hat is one of the biggest open source companies, 7,000 people, $1.8 billion revenue, blah, 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 all that usual stuff. And we do everything open source because we fundamentally believe in it. We're all crazy and we all wear hats. And that's a wonderful way of living. And I thought I'm not going to give you whatever slide deck on how cool Red Hat or everything else is, but I would like to take you back to where it all started, where we come from, why this whole Android world actually exists, what was needed for it to come along, and how we all in the open source community in the world of free software made that happen. So with no further ado, let's talk about the history of open source, open standards, open content, and a little bit of Red Hat, but not really that much. So this is how I normally look as an evangelist, which is my official job title, and you get evangelist at Red Hat quite simple. You get hired 9 years ago as a pre-sales guy. After 2 years, the vice president EMEA comes along and says you're the worst pre-sales we ever had. You go to customers, you talk bullshit all the time. You give them fairy tales about the wonderful world of open source, but you don't follow up, you don't write documentations, you never finish your work, and you never file your expenses on time. On the other hand, the people that listen to you actually understand more about open source, tend to buy more subscriptions, so we thought about making that your job. So I was like, so my job is going to be to talk bullshit, travel across the planet, never file expenses, and even get more money for it. Yes, where can I sign? That's how I became Evangelist 7 years ago. And as Red Hat Evangelist, I have 3 main tasks, actually 4. Number 1 is talk to customers, big customers, CIO, CTO level. Task number 2, 30% of my time is political lobbying. Some of you might remember the great software patent wars in Europe in 2002 till 2005. I was one of the guys involved in making sure that the European Commission doesn't get their software patents into the European legal system. We're still fighting against that, and that fight will never be over because, as you all know, software patents are the root of evil, and I think there should be added a chapter to the Bible or the Quran that says software patents. Another 30% of my job is actually convincing my own people. You know, Red Hat growing as fast as it does, we need to be very careful to not lose our open source culture, to not forget where we come from. Many of the new people that start working at Red Hat, especially the thousands of people that we're hiring right now, we are hiring if you want a job. We've been hiring, so I've been taking 2,500 people over the past few years through new hire orientations, explaining them what open source and free software really is, to make sure that they tell the right story to our customers and to our users, which is important. The final 10% then is events like this, community work, and as was said in the introduction, I'm still quite a tinkerer. I have 2 3D printers at home. I'm right now hacking my Roomba to do fantastic stuff like fetching beer from the fridge when I watch a movie. Didn't work so far, so I bought this wet mopping robot to clean up after it. And right now I'm going a little bit retro geek, so I have a rotary phone at home. I don't have a mobile phone at home. I really have an old-fashioned rotary phone like that. And a very old, 30 years old Bang & Olufsen stereo, which already had a serial connection 30 years ago. This is so cool. Right now I'm hacking it with an Arduino to find out the protocol, reverse engineer it, document it, and free all Bang & Olufsen on this planet. But I'm also a citizen of the first Transnational Republic, which is something we can discuss over beer this evening, which is about global democracy and political movement. And I was involved in the $100 laptop project years ago. Some of you might remember that one, where we had the real first working mesh network stuff, all based on open source and free software. If you ever want to contact me, I'm everywhere. I'm Wildeboer, which is quite a unique name. You will not find me on Facebook. I still think Mark Zuckerberg is one of the biggest criminals on this planet. To should never go to Facebook, especially when you have children or somebody you love, because it'll go wrong. And you will find me on Google+, and you're not allowed to ask why. Simply. So with that, let's turn to history. History is something we tend to forget and not talk about. And if we talk about history, we need to talk about the people that started all this. And this starts with this good-looking young man. This is Richard Matthew Stallman, also called RMS, the creator and inventor of the concept of free software. Also, he gave us, which is going to start a religious war, the most advanced text editing system on this planet called Emacs. And if you use VI, I feel very sorry for you. I used gedit. And I think, you know, with all the religious wars we had over the past 30 years of free software versus open source and all that kind of stuff, there's one important thing that we all should remember, and that's why Richard Stallman initially did all of this. And his explanation is something that I always like. He says, I consider that the golden rule requires that if I like a program, I must share it with other people. Now, the golden rule for many of you people is the fundament of every religion. Now, I'm not a religious person. I'm more or less an atheist. Oh, it's getting cozy now. I'm more or less an atheist. And the golden rule is the most simplest thing for building a perfect society. The golden rule effectively says, don't do to other people what you don't want to see happening to yourself. It's a negative form of the golden rule. The positive form is only do stuff to other people that you want to see happening to yourself. And from that you can deduct almost every religion and all the other things. And he said we must do the same thing for software. We must give software that ability. We must give software that freedom. And in order to get there, we need to look at the systems we have. And the systems were quite broken at that time. This is, you know, in the 1980s, where the first discussions came up about how do we protect software. Software didn't exist at that time as a market, as a product. It wasn't protected at all. Universities and etc. were writing software. Source code was being sent everywhere. If it was source code, a lot of stuff was done in assembler. And at that time, there was a global agreement, the Global Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, called the GATT Agreement. And they decided we need to protect software because this is becoming an emerging market, and we need to find a method for it. And there was a very long political discussion because how do you protect software? What is software? You know, is it source code? Is it binaries? And what do you do with it? And there was one group that said, you know, from the whole concept of so-called intellectual property, which regime are we going to use for this? In intellectual property, you have three big regimes. You have patents, you have copyright, and you have trademarks. And they're completely different, and you should never mix them together. That's why the term intellectual property is so dangerous. But then they said, okay, software is going to be used in industrial applications, for machines, for big mainframes, and all that kind of stuff. So the logical candidate to protect software is patents. Another group said, yeah, but that doesn't make sense because patents protect machines and not immaterial stuff. They were naive at that time. And so patents don't make sense, but copyright does make sense. And then the other group said, yeah, but software, the source code that we can read as human beings, that's not what the computer is running. The computer runs object code, binary code that nobody can read, so why protect it with copyright? They had a very long discussion, and ultimately they decided, knowing about its limitations, let's go for copyright protection for software. And that's the main reason we have software licenses. It's the only reason we have software licenses. And that's where Stallman looked at this. And Stallman said, okay, now how can I use the copyright system to guarantee the freedom I want for my software? So how can I abuse the copyright system, which was created to maintain monopolies, you know, where the copyright owner has a monopoly right to say what happens to his stuff. A long time ago when this started in the 16th century, yes, it goes that far, Queen Anne established the first copyright system, at that time with around a time period of 14 years. After 14 years, your copyright would expire and your content would become public domain. That has been extended a little bit over all the years. Right now, here in Europe, we are at 70 years after the death of the primary author. That's where copyright expires and your stuff becomes public domain, unless you have a fantastic publisher who knows some other neat tricks. For example, you can buy a CD box. There were printed exactly 120 pieces of these CD box from Bob Dylan songs, and it was called the Copyright Extension Edition. And the only reason they published this as CD box is to extend the copyright for another 50 years. This is the way it works. Now what Stallman did is creating the GNU General Public License. He made sure that you use the weapons of the copyright system to protect the freedom that you care about. And that was a very neat trick. And with this neat trick, he said, you know, now we can defend software freedom and we can move along. And that's how we got free software. Then we had some other people coming up and say, don't call it free software, call it open source because that's cooler and we are cooler. Well, you know, if Bruce Perens or Eric S. Raymond are really cooler than Stallman, I would agree, but other people might not think so. I think we can declare the holy war between free software and open source done. And we should move forward. It's really more important for us to bring more people into our ecosystems and to discuss all of these nitty-gritty details of stuff that nobody really cares about. What's the difference between BSD and GPL on a fundamental level? Yes, there is one. It's the same with the Apache license and etc. And it's really important to know about these differences, but the practical implications have so far been minimized. Nowadays, companies respect open source communities no matter what license they have, and we should also defend our rights under open source licenses wherever we can. Still not enough, of course. You have to also have machines that talk to each other, which then means you have to have somebody like Eric or like Tim, who created the web, HTTP and all of that, but far more important, he created the concept of open standards. And this is a point where I really want to stress my message coming from the Red Hat world, from the corporate world of open source and etc. In the mobile world, we really should start working more on standardized stuff. And we need to accept that we have a certain privilege given to us by our users to maintain their data, and we should be very responsible with that and make sure that our users can use stuff in the right way. Right now, I'm a little bit pissed, to be honest, about where this world is going after the whole WhatsApp scandal and etc. I cannot talk to my friends anymore. Honestly, I cannot. I have 7 different messaging apps on my phone because some people went to Threema, others went to FireChat, others went to SecureChat, others went to this, others went to that. And when I'm getting thirsty for a beer and I want to contact a few of my friends, I'm typing for a fucking half hour to get on. Don't even think about sending a picture to these people in private. You know, 6 different applications, 6 times editing the different pictures and etc. This must end. I beg you, please, to find a solution for that. My personal solution for that is quite simple. I'm going back to SMS. I have a contract, and thanks to Nelly Cruz from the European Commission, we now have free roaming all across Europe as soon as you're in the European Union. So I can send SMS for free to everyone, and everybody with a mobile phone can receive SMS. It's becoming, actually, it is becoming my social network of choice. Which is kind of weird and crazy when you think about it, but on the other hand, as long as app developers and companies still think that owning messaging and chat data is somehow important for the bottom line, we will have AOL versus CompuServe all over again. And this is reality. It's not only Google Plus versus Facebook, it really is WhatsApp versus whatever other messenger, etc., etc., etc. I cannot take my conversations, my knowledge, my experiences with other people with me as soon as they decide to switch applications. Please work on that. It's the only reason I'm here. Thank you. And that's not limited to chats and etc. It really is about, there's a bigger picture. I'll come to that in a minute. I'm not running out of time, but I make sure that I don't take too long for everything. You know, with all the concepts that we have created in the background, with open standards, with open source, with Creative Commons and etc., the tools and the foundations are here to make it better. And it's up to all of us to actually use these technologies in the most productive way. And I'm not going to give you the marketing bullshit of mobile first or all of that kind of stuff. The only thing I'm saying is we now should think about, in our minds, to give up the whole client-server approach on anything. We have complete cloud servers in our pockets with our smartphones. We don't really need more servers. And what we see, or what I see from my perspective, post-Snowden, with the growing awareness of privacy and security and etc., is a mobile-first trend that's interesting because it's a device-first trend. Apple and Google both announced almost simultaneously that they will, by default, encrypt all data on the devices to protect against the NSA and etc. The FBI has already claimed that this will, sort of end all criminal prosecution and etc. And they will not be able to stop the terrorists and etc. as soon as everybody has encryption. I think what the real message here is that both Google and Apple have recognized that it is your data on your device, and you should be in control, and you should own your data. That's, in my opinion, an extremely good thing. It's something that I've been promoting for years and years and years, to say, your data, your control, your decision. And that brings me back to the point I made earlier about standardizing everything, making sure that my data becomes exchangeable and not locked into whatever system on my device and where I cannot get it out. We have this out there. You know, this is my main job. Data freedom is what I sometimes call it. I go to customers who have petabyte of data locked up in proprietary systems and are unable to take it out. They cannot migrate their own data from old systems to new systems. One of the main reasons that when you step out here and go to an ATM to get cash, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of machines still running Windows XP. And the main reason for that is that these companies have totally forgotten about we need to move on if this stuff dies. You know, technology dies, and when technology dies, it tends to take all its family, all its data with it. And that's the main reason people don't upgrade and don't migrate. In order to stop that from happening, we need to make sure that all data becomes accessible using ideally open standards, but at least in some documented way. So don't invent new data formats for your super-duper application. Please start looking at what we already have. Data storage and data handling is becoming a commodity. You know, that's one of the wonderful things about open source. Whenever a new technology pops up, like we had a few years ago, everybody started talking about NoSQL data. It was so cool, etc. And NoSQL would kill Oracle. That worked. Now Larry Ellison is going to retire. Think about that. That's what he says. I don't believe it. But the whole NoSQL movement started with, again, a lot of different implementations. Everybody thought they could do it better. Reality is, a lot of the stuff is now commoditized, and cloud computing and all of that kind of stuff helps a lot in that, in offering streamlined stuff. So all the people that are right now using Heroku on their backend for stuff, in 2 years from now, they will use Docker-based solutions. Why? Because Docker has become the community for this kind of workload, and the commodity for this kind of workload. And working in a way with systems that is based on commodity, that uses open source, etc., allows us for new platforms for interchange of data between stuff. Call it big data, call it whatever you want. But it allows me as a user to share my data in better ways. And it's up to you developers to take advantage of that and to find and to make sure that the Internet of Things that we are slowly approaching does not become the next Skynet, which is my biggest fear. Before we start the Internet of Things, can we please start an Internet of People? That would be so cool. Where we get people to connect to each other, where people can identify themselves, where people can securely communicate. That's one of the things that I was hoping that the mobile revolution would bring along. And I've been working on that years ago with the OLPC, with the $100 laptop, where we had working mesh network, according to the standards and etc. These little laptops for the school children in Africa and South America, etc., they would form their own mesh network without any user interaction. You just switch it on and you're connected to all the children around you. Just work out of the box. Pure magic. The wireless chips in the mobile phones are perfectly capable of working in that mode. However, they don't, for a lot of reasons. The main reason, in my opinion, still being that somebody wants to be in control, and control needs centralization. The best civil disobedience is to decentralize. So if you want to protect your data, if you want to enhance privacy and security, etc., start decentralizing everything. And let's take a closer look at how we can bring mesh networking to the Android platform, to Apple. Apple, by the way, has a solution for that since iOS 7. Of course, it's highly proprietary, non-documented, etc. But they already can switch seamlessly between Bluetooth, the wireless chip, and other stuff to build a mesh network for local communication. And I don't know how far the work on that is on the Android platform or AOSP, but I sincerely hope that the next time I'm here, I can send pictures to all the people here with one single flick on my mobile device, and it will find all of your mobile devices and it will show you if you can accept or not accept my message, my photos, etc. Mesh networking, decentralized technologies, in my opinion, should be the next big thing, because it's really about one thing, and that's being user-centric, and that's caring about the privacy and the rights of our users. Now, with that philosophical stuff out of the way, let me show you again how this all started. This is Linus Torvalds. At the time he created what later became a kernel. He didn't start writing a kernel. It's one of those myths and legends that I need to destroy. He started writing a process scheduler. A very simple process scheduler using Minix at that time. And under Minix, and the only thing this would do is switch between two processes. One would print the letter A on the screen, and the other one the letter B. And that's it. And he opened this very bottle of beer when AAA, BBB, AAA started to show on his screen. And he thought he would be the king of the world, get all the girls at university, etc., 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 which worked. So he's married. And has 3 kids, I think, 3 or 3. Yeah. Well, the main story here is that then after he did this process scheduler, he wanted to do the next thing, which became the kernel. And he was asking, how do I write a kernel? And people told him, well, a Unix-like kernel is based on a standard called POSIX. And he said, okay, let's get the POSIX standard. Now, the local library at the university didn't have a copy of the POSIX standard, so he asked on the internet. At that time, we were using obscure systems like NNTP. Anyone remember? NNTP, UUCP, yeah. Trumpet Windsock, anyone? Yeah. So he was asking on the internet in the news group, Convoys Minix, can somebody send me a copy of the POSIX manual? And a guy from Canada with a huge beard actually sent him an illegal copy of the POSIX standard with snail mail. And that's how he started creating his first kernel that he then put on online on an FTP server, and he didn't call it Linux. Anybody know the original name? How was it originally called? He didn't call it Linux, he called it Freaks. Freaks with an X. How cool is that? So totally cool. And this is one of the things about our industry. And then the FTP administrator decided, Freaks sucks. That's the most stupid name. I don't want to have a directory called Freaks on my university server. You're Linus Torvalds, I'm going to call it Linux. Deal with it. And that's how the name Linux was created. And that tells me 3 things about our industry that I will never tell our customers because it will kill our company. Number 1, our industry works like this. It all happens by accident. All of it. Number 2, it is done by amateurs. And number 3, nothing changes. You know, if you take a look back 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I actually did, you know, this is my job, this is cool. I went to a Swiss bank 7 years ago, and this Swiss bank told me, we are not going to use open source technologies, Mr. Wildeboer, because our legal department has talked to us, and they said, when we use Linux in our bank, it means we have to open source everything we do. And we don't want to do that as a Swiss bank. We think you are socialists, you are communists, you disrespect property. And as a bank, we cannot afford to do that. So I was kicked out of the building, really, originally, as a Red Hat guy, 7 years ago. I came back 2 years ago, after the financial crisis, to that same bank with a different CTO. And now they're running on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And I told him, you know, your predecessor, who kicked me out 7 years ago, said that we are the communists and socialists and etc. Now here comes the kicker. 90%, more than 90% of the stock exchange markets on this planet run on Linux. The whole financial backend system on this planet runs on free software. Without free software, capitalism wouldn't be possible anymore. And think about that for a second. How we entered that completely. And then think about how open source and free software rules your life nowadays completely. Whenever people tell me, when will Linux win? I always say, we have won. 5 years ago, we won completely. It's over, it's history. There's no way you can take a modern day in your modern life without using Linux on whatever level. It starts in the morning when you switch on your DSL router, which is 24/7 on anyway. That thing runs Linux. Your flat screen TV has Linux built in. Your navigation system in your car, your mobile phone, your whatever device, maybe even your toaster is now running Linux inside. And it's only growing everywhere. The backend systems, the big switches, the Junipers, and etc., they all run on Linux. Interoperability problems nowadays are typically, how do I interact on the network level with the Linux TCP/IP stack? 20 years ago, there were commercials from Cisco, where Cisco was saying every internet packet runs through a Cisco router. Nowadays, I can say every internet packet runs through the Linux TCP/IP stack. We have one everywhere. Open source and free software owns everything except for one thing, and that's the desktop. And that's the question I get asked since 10 years. When will Linux finally overtake the desktop? And my reply to that is, and has always been, and will always be, it's finally going to happen next year. Finally. But reality is, next year, there will be no desktop. Because there is a fundamental change happening. We are getting away from using machines with big CPUs and lots of storage and etc. with local data, with local files that cannot interact with the rest of the world. We are moving towards a world that has grown up, that looks a little bit more modern. And this world is about connected data and context-driven data work. It means that I want to work on my presentation regardless of my context. When I'm sitting at the airport, I want to handle it on my tablet. When I'm sitting at home, I want to do it on my big screen with my huge monitor. When I'm in the car, I want to do it on my mobile phone, maybe even through dictation. The way we work with data is becoming far more dynamic, far more connected. And if you want to call that cloud-based or whatever, I don't really care. The old desktop paradigm is dying and it's going away. And that's a damn good thing in my opinion, because I'm getting sick and tired of Microsoft Word. I don't know about you, but for me it's over, it's history, and it must go. And this new paradigm, no matter if you call it Google Glass or, take a look at the Sony guys. The Sony guys are showing the wonderful new eyewear and stuff, etc. Our interaction with data is slowly but surely fundamentally changing. And when was the last time you really cared about having your home directory with all your documents set up in the right way, etc.? Nowadays everybody uses Dropbox or whatever other thing to get stuff coordinated and organized. Now we need to take the next step. How can we take Word documents or LibreOffice and OpenOffice ODF documents and make them editable by different people at the same time and embed that in the data form? We are moving away from static data formats into dynamic data exchange formats, which is going to put a lot of pressure on a lot of things and make a lot of changes. But this is how the mobile revolution can go on. This is how we can all move on and move forward when we care about privacy, security, etc. So here is my tip for all of you. If you start caring about the privacy and the security of your users, if you accept the fact that we are living in a user-centric world where privacy is key, where security becomes far more important than anything else, where data should be quite close to me, literally, I want to have my data protected in my pocket, on my mobile phone. My digital life is on that device, so you better take care of it and make sure it doesn't go wrong. And we are working hard on that. You all saw what happened a few days ago with shell shock. Yeah? Everybody knows that? Yeah. You all updated your bash? Yeah. Really? Yeah. On all your cloud servers and all your forgotten instances at whatever provider? Well, to be honest, shell shock isn't that big a shock to me, and the good thing is, the same it was with Heartbleed, even though the press is going mad and everybody is talking doomsday scenarios, etc., both these, Heartbleed and shell shock, were published together with the solution. Never forget that. We open source people, we know that we are under huge pressure and we talk about problems and solve them. And the moment we have the solution, we can talk about it. This is exactly what happened with shell shock. We coordinated between a lot of distributions and interested third parties. We coordinated this whole thing, and we came out with the announcement, there is a problem, ourselves. It was not from whatever evil hacker out there that told the world, oh, Linux is dead, oh, we're going to kill you all. No, we did it ourselves. And that's the same with Heartbleed. With Heartbleed, we also coordinated and published that ourselves. We are perfectly aware that we can never deliver 100% perfect code, but we are also aware of our responsibility to our users and to our customers, etc., and making sure that we don't only complain about problems, but also deliver solutions. Now, if we can get that ethics, that morality, into the minds of all developers out there working on the next revolution, on the Internet of Things, the Internet for users, etc., if we can work together and can use this event to work on all of this stuff in a very positive way and not in a competitive way, I think we're on a good way, and that's the only message I have. And now I have time for a few questions and a wonderful giveaway. That's it. Sorry for that. So they told me for a good question I'm allowed to give this away. Is that correct? Yes. Yes? Let me see if I can use this myself. So Jan, first question to yourself. Do you like your head? Yes, I like it. Thank you. So anybody, any questions to me or bigger world?
What would you suggest to do if you're the only voice in your team that wants to use open standards and open source software, and your entire organisation pretty much stands?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So what do you do when you are effectively the only one in a bigger organization who understands open standards and wants your organization to move there, but nobody's really listening and nobody's really understanding? I'm paraphrasing a little bit. That's what I do. Well, that's a tough one. I know it because I've been there and I'm still there all the time. The thing is, when you're inside an organization, you can try to build a network, try to build proof of concept solutions that show this stuff. Typically, however, you need to have somebody up there understanding it and directing down the people to go that way. Getting there becomes a little bit more difficult. One of the things that happens, this is my job. I get invited to organizations to come in with my red hat and tell exactly what you've been trying to say for years, but nobody's listening to, with all my powers and etc. And then they say, oh no, we need to do this. And then they find out it already exists in their organization. There are two things that I always talk about when I talk about open standards, and that's risk and that's risk. When you use non-open standards, when you use proprietary data formats, you have the following problem. What happens when your main provider of your software solution goes away for whatever reason? Yeah, you don't sign a new contract, or they stop existing, or they get bought by Oracle or IBM, which is a 90% possibility. What do you do then? Migrating data from an old solution to a new one is typically seen as something very expensive. I say, no, it's not. The migration out of an old system to a new system, ideally based on open standards, is a business risk. It could happen to you anytime that you're forced to do this. So please start making the numbers. How expensive is the full data migration from my closed system to an open system? And calculate that number every year. Put it in the books every year as a business risk. What happens when our provider goes away? This is the problem we're facing. What you do with that is, financially, you decouple the data migration from the solution migration. And you show that it is a risk, and the costs that are caused by that are caused by maintaining the old solution with proprietary systems. And that gives your managers and your bean counters a sense that there might be a better way. And then you can come in with all the technical arguments, proof of concepts, and etc. But if there is no cost pain, if there is no financial pain, they will not listen. That's 20 years of experience in business. You have to show them it's a business risk of not going there. And I can give you wonderful examples for that. Here in the UK is a guy who filed tax expenses 10 years ago, and the tax office finally decided he had to pay something like 600,000 quid. And he said, no, I only have to pay 100,000 quid, and I can show it. So he was trying to open his old tax reports. Couldn't do it. Proprietary backups on a proprietary backup system, so he opened a bounty. He offered £50,000 if somebody can decode his own data. Think about that for a second. That's a huge business opportunity. And that's happening everywhere. So it's really showing the financial risk, and then you can show the technical advantages. And you can point to people like my good friend. She's my best friend. And I don't have too many friends. Here is my best friend. This is Nelly Kroes. Nelly Kroes is the Vice President of the European Commission, and she says stuff like this. Many authorities have found themselves unintentionally locked into proprietary technology for decades. This is a waste of public money that most public bodies can no longer afford. You can use this quote. That helps. Nelly has said, and that's, now she's going out of the commission, unfortunately, going to be replaced by the most stupid German guy ever, called Günther Oettinger. Just like the beer, the cheap beer, it's going to be disaster. But she made sure that companies and organizations and governments focus on open standards. Why? Because it creates better competition in the market. It lowers the entry barrier. With open standards, this is also an argument to make. With open standards, I'm free to choose my implementation. If right now I'm talking with a lot of governments and cities and etc. to switch to ODF and not switch to OpenOffice or LibreOffice, they can continue to use Microsoft Office, because Microsoft Office nowadays, the current version, actually does a good job at implementing ODF. First the standard, then the application. First you need to get a fundamental decision in your organization. Let's focus on open standards and on which open standards. And then you can move into working with open source and open source solutions. Don't do it the other way around, because it will always fail. It's a complex answer, I know, but it's not a secret. Here you go.
systems. A really important question is, where is our data? What location? Especially for countries that are like Brazil, the data has to be in that country. It can't go outside of that. How do you convince companies it doesn't matter where data is?
So the question is, where do big organizations keep their data? How do you convince them? How do they do it? Especially in the financial world. The financial world is heavily regulated. So in the financial world, you are forced to keep your data local anyway. You cannot give it away. That's why the financial world has a big problem in thinking about cloud solutions and having applications on the cloud level for mobile phones, etc., because they're bound by regulations that don't allow them to do this. However, you also have the markets themselves. So if you do trading, if you do high-frequency trading, you have to be close to the market. So your data has to be close to the market. We're talking about nanoseconds nowadays for turnaround there. So the financial world is very heavily interested in keeping the data in their own data centers. However, big financial institutions are global by definition, and some of them act worldwide. So they typically look at regulations to put their stuff in the right place. And they will not take your personal data and all of that stuff into the cloud, into Amazon, and etc. They're very afraid of going there. We're slowly but surely working on that. One of the things that's happening now is that banks are seeing that this level, this data storage part, is not a competitive thing. It doesn't really give them a competitive edge. So it makes sense to say, for example, for 5 banks in Germany or in the UK, to build one data center together with virtual machines and software-defined storage, and etc., and distribute all the capabilities they have there between all of them. So even direct competing banks will use the same technology, but under their control, under their ownership. I think that's a fair approach, and I think the same concept is what you see with governments and public institutions saying, we need to create national clouds. Now, I'm all for national clouds. Don't get me wrong. I like this idea of having a German cloud. I would call it Kraut Cloud. Should be really cool. I have the domain name, by the way. But I think we should also make sure that these national clouds are designed and certified in a transnational way. As a provider, I don't want to have 27 different certification levels for 27 different national clouds. I want to have one European or global cloud definition and then local implementations. So that's happening because it is commodity. We see this now with Docker, with software-defined storage, and etc. coming up more and more, that customers are actually more interested in building these solutions themselves, but also making them as universal as possible, so they can rent out capacities to other organizations, maybe even directly competing. So your data is most of the time safe. Most of the time. Most of the time. So with that, I'm done, I guess. All right.